Good morning, everybody, and welcome to day 7 of the course. By now, you have read Heart of Darkness, and you've got that nice second coat of paint on your understanding, or in some cases, third coat of paint. And now we're going to kick off the training wheels and get right into the thick of the book and go right for the meaning. So, before we start, just a quick review of some terms. Theme. What is the theme of a piece of literature? Hopefully, whatever you just said had something to do with an idea. Every great piece of literature is built around an idea, and the greater the piece of literature, the more ideas it could be built around simultaneously. So when I say that the poet adds something, so does the novelist, so does the artist. They add something, some sort of great idea. And that is the theme. Now, an idea on its own, you might think, well, that doesn't sound like what I understand of, the word theme. When I think theme, I think of like a color theme for a room, or for those of you who've got like a theme going on in your own bedroom, like Sens fans or whatever, and everything in your room is Ottawa Senators. That's, you see it everywhere. Well, the thing is, with an idea, the author doesn't want to just come out and like brand you right between the eyes with it, or they don't want to make it obvious. The idea becomes meaningful when you figure out what it is. And so what the author does is they reinforce the theme throughout their work of literature. It appears everywhere. And some of the places where it can appear are obvious, like in a character or in dialogue. You'll see it in places like that. But there's also hidden places where it can appear, like symbols and motifs and allusions to other works of literature, and in imagery that you have to really sort of like look at carefully and see the connection between what you're seeing and the greater idea that's being shared with you. Right? Heart of Darkness is a great work of literature, and as such, it's got a variety of themes in it. The one we're going to look at today is this idea of the hypocrisy of the civilized. All right? So we, us, Westerners, we look at ourselves as being civilization. Lord of the Flies, for those of you who read it, is all about that idea of civilization and trying to like maintain it and the factors that work against it. In colonial times, colonial powers had this, like they had a variety of reasons why they would go off and colonize the rest of the world. One of the official reasons was that they're going to bring civilization to people who are not civilized. So in Heart of Darkness, we see the African people as being portrayed as very uncivilized based on our standards. Now, there's bias at work here, obviously, right? But let's forget about the bias and let's assume that Africa is uncivilized at this point in time, all right? Let's assume that our standards are the right ones, and let's assume that the Africans who have a lot of superstitious beliefs and don't wear, as much clothing as we would say that they should, and still eat other people. Not all of them do, but there are some cannibals there. They're uncivilized, and the Europeans are going to bring civilization to Africa. What Conrad is going to show us, though, is that there's a lot of hypocrisy here. So here's the thing about the official reason versus the, maybe the more realistic reasons. There was tons of money to be made. And that is something that is very disturbing when you think about it. The idea that a group of people are going to victimize another group of people so that they can become wealthy, all right? It is disturbing and it is dark, but at this time in history, in Conrad's time, it's totally normal. And Conrad is going to show us the hypocrisy of it. So let me give you an example of where this theme is reinforced. Right off the very, very bat, I was struck by something. I noticed it as like a structuralist approaching the text. I see that there are a few people on this boat whose names are weird. There's the lawyer and the accountant and the director of companies. All three of these people, their names, their titles are capitalized as if they're their names. So I got thinking about it a little bit. When a country goes off to colonize other countries, what do they bring with them? But when you start civilizing it, you're going to bring in things like law, and you're going to bring in trade, and you're going to start building things. And from the official story was these were things that were going to civilize the African people and Africa as a continent. It was going to cause it to develop and progress, right? But what we're going to see very early on is that these forces of civilization are going to have awful consequences in Africa. So here's an example. One of the first times where we see any mention of law or see any image of law is where we see the 6 chained up African men who are carrying baskets full of, I believe it's earth, on their head. Doesn't matter what they're carrying. They're being forced to work. They are being enslaved. Now, by this time in history, slavery in Europe has been abolished officially. But what's happened here is the Belgians have instituted a law. They brought in a law, and they have, these African people have obviously broken it. And their punishment is forced labor. So I want you to think about this. When you are bringing in law, because civilization needs rules, you bring in law, and that law is supposed to be there to protect people and to keep them safe. The law here, though, is being used to enslave and to exploit, all right? The hypocrisy of the whole thing. Back in Europe, colonial officials would be bragging about the fact that they've set up law and there's now law and order in this colony. But on the ground, we see that it's being used to enslave people. And those people are being worked to death. The accountant is on the boat too. His name is capitalized. Business and trade, the idea of progress. Europeans, the official story was that colonies weren't there to just be sort of like land grabs and places where you just exploit resources. Well, the Spanish kind of did that very much did that in South America. But later colonialism, the idea was there was going to be some sort of fair trade going on, that Europeans are going to sell new technologies to the Africans, and the Africans are going to buy those things with their raw resources, which then go back to Europe and are turned into more things, all right? And it's good for everybody, except it's not. When we see the way that business is set up there, we see that it's all just a scam. The whole thing is a scam. You've got a brick maker who doesn't make any bricks. You've got all this pipe that's been brought in from Europe and then dumped in a hole. You've got a railway being built, and they are setting off charges of explosives to blow up a ridge that's not in the way of the railway, right? The business model over there makes zero sense, because that's not what Europeans are there for, really. What they're there for is to just take resource. I mentioned Kurtz a few times. To understand the novel, and this goes for the next 3 lessons when we are looking at the different themes, everything in this novel comes back to Kurtz. You understand Kurtz, you understand this novel. So Kurtz embodies this theme of the hypocrisy of the civilization. So when you think about what do we know about Kurtz, he's the greatest of all the ivory dealers. He brings in more ivory than anybody else combined. And there's a very dark observation that happens throughout the novel, that most of his ivory, though, is fossil ivory, which means it's not ivory that's been taken from a hunted elephant. It's ivory that has been dug up, is the official reason. What we find out, though, is it's ivory that Kurtz has stolen, because he's got an army of followers who he uses to go and raid and kill other people. And when we see his hut, we see very clearly the hypocrisy of the situation, that this guy, whose job it is, in his mind, to come and civilize, and he's got these great plans for Africa. He keeps talking about his grand plans that he's got. This guy is just a thief, and he is a vicious thief, killing people and putting their heads on stakes as maybe a message to other people not to mess with him, or as a sign of power, or who knows what. What we do know is this is not civilization. What else do we know about Kurtz that relates to hypocrisy? Well, he's writing a book on the suppression of savage customs. Yeah, there's some definite irony there. A guy who puts people's heads on stakes is writing a book about how to suppress the savage customs of the African people. Now, Kurtz he's symbolic of Europe as a whole. There's something cool about him in terms of like his genealogy. His name is German, so we know that his parents, or at least his father, would be German. But then we find out also that his parents are, one of them is half English and one of them is half French. So his genealogy is German, English, and French. And Germany, England, and France are like the number 1, 2, and 3 strong powers in Europe at the time. I mean, think back to what you know about World War I and who was on what side. Those were the number 1, 2, and 3 powers. So Kurtz, if we look at him as being representative of Europe, we've got Europe symbolically trying to suppress the savage customs of the people in Africa. But think about the savagery, like the magnitude of the savagery that you see in this novel, of the starvation and of the beatings, just like the pure cruelty that you see. And here they are, embodied in the symbolism of Kurtz, wanting to suppress what, this darkness that they think that they see among the African people. There's a lot of hypocrisy that we see related to Kurtz in terms of his backstory, which we don't know much about until the end of the novel. But the whole reason why Kurtz went into Africa was to make money, because he wanted to marry some girl back in Europe, and her family didn't agree because Kurtz wasn't of high enough class, all right? So he goes to Africa specifically to make a bunch of money. In this sort of vignette that we see of Kurtz's intended talking to Marlowe about how much she loved Kurtz, and we can assume that she really wanted to be with him, but because he didn't have the money in order to make things happen, to be accepted into that class, the parents didn't agree. But they would agree with a monster. This is the point that I'm trying to make. They would agree with high-class people, wealthy people who got wealthy by going to Africa and slaughtering other people. And if it's not Africa, to Asia. And if not Asia, to South America. All over the world, the colonial legacy was one of slaughter and oppression and brutality. For the Marxist in you, you're going to have lots to say about Heart of Darkness. And so the hypocrisy related to Kurtz is the fact that he would be rejected as a good man, but accepted as a monster by the parents of his intended. Today, your job is going to be to read closely. You're going to do a close reading of the text, and you're going to start to pick out some detail that relates to this first theme. Today I'm going to give you the guided tour, but as the days go on, I'm going to release the responsibility to you, and I'm going to hope that you're able to read carefully and pick those details out and to make those good, rich connections to pull some real meaning out of this novel. You're also going to be looking at some history. I've got a couple of videos for you to see. There's a documentary and also another video that shows you what Belgium was like at the time. And I'm going to get you to respond to me in the form of a video. The project for this unit is going to be not a writing project, but an oral project. And it's going to involve a video recording, and so I want to see who among you is able to do a rough recording and submit it to me. So don't worry about high quality, don't worry about doing video editing. This is just a rough cut. I want to see if you can shoot some video and if you can get it online or get it to me in some way, right? Aside from that, we're going to continue the discussion, and I'd like everybody to get in there and make good use of that opportunity to process information so that you further your understanding of this novel and pull more meaning out of it.